What's up, YouTube? So, it really doesn't matter whether you've been in this audio game for a while or if you're brand new to it. Without a doubt, one brand that you would have heard of is Sennheiser. The Sennheiser brand is well known in the audiophile world and audio in general. For decades, they've produced some of the most widely used and much loved headphones. Around 20 years ago, they released the HD600, and a few short years after that, the HD650. And both of those combined probably ended up being the most popular open back headphones to date. So much so that many people regard the HD600 and 650 not necessarily as reference quality, but rather a baseline for what genuinely good audio is supposed to sound like. And finally, after all these years, Sennheiser is ready to make a new addition to their mid-range lineup. Enter the HD660S. Now, unfortunately, I do not have the HD600 to compare to the 660S, but Sennheiser's PR company in my region were kind enough to send the 650 along for comparisons of the build, design, and sound. So at first glance, not a great deal seems to have changed compared to the predecessors. Whereas the original HD600 had this really weird paint spatter design, the 650 took a more subdued look, opting for a glossy metallic grey finish. But this time around, the 660S is far more subtle, even more so than the 650, offering no painted elements other than the fairly subtle Sennheiser logo on the headband and the HD660S model on each side of the ear cups. Compared to the previous models, the 660S is still made mostly out of plastic, and the only metal you'll find are on the grills, the drivers themselves, and within the headband adjustment system. Now, the plastic construction doesn't feel cheap per se, but it's nowhere near as premium of a feeling as you'd get from the likes of the HiFiMan Sundara, which is predominantly made out of metal. The actual build quality feels on par with considerably cheaper products such as the audio-technica M50X and M40X, for example, although it should be noted that despite being made out of plastic, there's really not much creaking going on. Compared to the 650, the 660S does feel a bit more sturdy, but that could very well be because the 650, this one in particular, is a demo model and therefore was used more and so has a bit more wear and tear. Generally speaking, the 660S is reasonably comfortable, but it does require some break-in. Out of the box, the clamping force is quite high, so what I had to do to remedy this was to extend the headband and then place the headphones on one of my studio monitors just to stretch them out a little bit. In order to really get that perfect fit feeling, that would require some more prolonged stretching. However, just a few short days on the monitor really did help out a great deal. The lightweight nature of the 660S certainly does help comfort, as does the relatively soft headband padding. Although this padding really isn't as comfortable as you'd find, for example, on the second generation Bose Quiet Comfort 35. One aspect of the build and design that I simply can't wrap my head around is with the headband adjustment system. The problem here is that there are absolutely no markings for you to reference as to how much you've extended the headband, and so you'd need to count the amount of clicks on each side in order to make sure that you've extended both sides equally. So it seems a little strange that after all these years, Sennheiser just somehow keeps forgetting, or simply couldn't be bothered to just add a little bit of paint or just an engraving of some kind to give you some sort of reference. Now, the last aspect of the design to consider are with the actual drivers. Now, Sennheiser does claim that the drivers used in the 660S are based on the drivers that are found in the 700. However, if we take a look at some of the graphs found online of measurements done on the 660S and the 700, the impedance and phase shift graphs in particular suggest that, in fact, the drivers used in the 660S and those in the 700 might actually be identical. But then, to confuse matters even more, when we remove the ear pads, the 660S drivers look identical to those found in the HD650 too. It's only when we really look at the drivers from the rear through the grills that we do see some differences. Overall, in terms of the design, Sennheiser pretty much seemed to have gone with the old "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" approach, which really is a bit of a pity, as there certainly are areas that could have used some improvements. Something else that is quite interesting is that due to the fact that the impedance figure of the 660S is half that of the 650 and 600, Sennheiser have touted the new model as being more portable friendly, meaning it's easier to drive from low-powered devices. However, a perhaps more important figure to look at is the sensitivity of the drivers. The 660S is only marginally more sensitive than the 650, meaning that it really isn't that much more power efficient, and so it would still benefit from using high-powered amps. So now that we've got the design out of the way, how does the 660S actually sound? The HD series all have their strengths and weaknesses, both in absolute terms and with reference to each other, but sonic differences mainly seem to come down to a person's personal preference. The HD600 sticks to perhaps a more neutral signature, whereas the 650 has a slightly elevated bass response and overall warmer and smoother sound. But the most obvious similarity with both of those is a lack of sub-bass extension. Here the HD650 definitely fares better in this regard, but neither come close to modern open-back designs using planar magnetic drivers. So where does that leave the 660S? Well, broadly speaking, judging from graphs of the 600 and 650 along with my own listening impressions of the 650, the 660S performs similar to both the 600 and 650, including that lack of sub-bass. So if you hoped that the 660S would fix that bass issue, you'll probably be disappointed. However, whether or not this is a significant flaw will depend on your preference and type of music that you listen to. If your taste in music doesn't have much energy in the sub-bass region, then you'll probably not have an issue with this. You see, it's not that the sub-bass isn't there, but just significantly lower in volume relative to the rest of the spectrum. So whilst comparing the 660S to the 650, I noticed how much their sound was improved, subjectively, when I flipped the X-Bass Plus switch on my Micro IDSD Black Label. Both headphones just seemed to come alive, as though all the music was finally getting through. There were certain tracks where I found myself thinking something to the effect of, "Oh right, there's the bass guitar." But again, this will largely depend on your taste in music, as music that mainly contains natural instruments and vocals generally don't tend to have a great deal of energy in the sub-bass region. More modern music, on the other hand, often relies somewhat heavily on artificial bass and sub-bass notes and other generated sounds that can come across as sounding somewhat thin on the 650 and 660S without the aid of a bass boost. Moving on to the rest of the bass region, the 660S tends to have more punch, whereas the 650 has more of a fluid and deeper apparent rumble, a difference which is more noticeable with the aid of a bass boost. But really, the mid-range is where the HD line has always shined. Honestly, I get it. I get why so many people have such a deep affection for the mid-range of these headphones and why they consider it to be a baseline. But it's in comparing the mid-range and treble of the 660S to that of the 650 that I hear more distinct differences in their characteristics. Yes, the 650 does have that Sennheiser veil, but this could also be regarded as sounding effortless and non-fatiguing. Depending on your taste, this could be a positive or a drawback. Switching back and forth, the 660S doesn't seem to have that veil, and perhaps because of that specifically, it portrays the music with what seems to be a more forward presence. It's got a more upfront mid-range, which I know many people prefer by a large margin. Some headphones just sound too warm and too smooth, so much so that they mask details in the mids and the highs. And here the HD650 does seem to slightly fall into that camp, at least when compared to the 660S. That's not to say that the details aren't there. The 650 certainly does retrieve them well, but it's just not quite with the same presence as you'd find on the 660S. But that's not to suggest that the 660S portrays them in such a manner that it feels like they're hammering away at my ears as if to scream, I'm here, notice me." But rather in comparison, the 650's mids and highs are just softer and more laid back. So that does beg the question, is the more apparent clarity offered by the 660S as a result of an objectively more accurate reproduction of the sound, or simply a different flavor of the sound? Honestly, your guess is as good as mine. The fact of the matter is, I wasn't in the recording booth. I don't have a truly accurate reference as to what the music is actually truly supposed to sound like. All I can do is to rely on what sounds most natural to me. So what I can say is this: if you like the 650 but want more presence in the mids, then the 660S might be a great option for you. But if you like the 650 just the way it is, Still go out and try the 660S if you can, and then decide which suits you better. For me personally though, the 650 sounds just a bit more natural, and therefore that would be my pick. So in conclusion, how would I judge the overall value of the 660S? You see, on the one hand, I want to respect the heritage and influence the HD line has had on the audiophile world. But on the other hand, I also need to consider what's to offer by the competition. While a marginal step up in build quality and refinement in design and finishing is appreciated, it's the overall bang for buck performance compared to more modern technology used in modern designed headphones that make me wonder about the 660S. As mentioned, the 600 and 650 were released around 20 and 15 years ago respectively, but it also feels exactly that way. In some regard, the 660S simply feels like a marginally more modern interpretation of a roughly 2-decade-old classic. My greatest uncertainty though is in the price. Both the 600 and 650 had price tags of around $500 at the time of release. So, do we commend Sennheiser for being able to offer the new model at a price that seems to have avoided any and all forms of inflation? Or do we consider what the competition has to offer for the same price and judge the value purely based on that? Perhaps if the price was dropped to a more reasonable figure of around $300, then the 660S would make more sense. But as it stands, the overall value does seem to be lacking when taking into account other products that are available at the same price, such as the HiFiMan Sundara, for example. Yes, the 660S is a good set of cans, but there are better built and arguably better sounding headphones out there for the same price or even cheaper. Personally though, as I said, I still do prefer the sound of the 650 slightly more than that of the 660S, but I would not consider either one of them as my go-to set of cans for my taste in sonic signatures. So that brings us to the end of the review. Thank you so much for watching, and especially a big thanks to everyone who has subscribed to my channel so far. If you're new to my channel and would like to see more honest, relevant and realistic reviews from me, please do consider subscribing as well. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, YouTube.